Welcome to Beyond Distribution with GTDC Podcast. Today's guest is Larry Walsh, CEO and Chief Analyst at Channelnomics. Larry suggests that the value proposition for distribution continues to grow stronger due to vendors' expansion goals, even more so with the increasing focus on data and digital transformation. How will greater data synergies and analytics affect sell-through? What effect will digital marketplaces have on partner engagement and sales growth? How has the value of distribution been affected by cloud expansion and hyperscalers? Here are the answers to those important questions and more in this episode of Beyond Distribution with GTDC. Be sure to check out the GTDC Knowledge Hub to access more than 40 additional podcast episodes and a host of other valued industry resources. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest podcast from Beyond Distribution. I am thrilled today to have my friend and certainly a contributor to GTDC and one of the leading industry analysts, Larry Walsh, to join us. Larry's the CEO and the lead analyst for Channelnomics. Larry, welcome.
Hey, Frank, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to talk to you. Although, we talk frequently, obviously, but I thought it would make sense to broadcast our conversations a little wider, and get more people to listen to what we have to say.
Yeah, we could actually do more damage that way.
Yeah, possibly. So let's start, Larry, with maybe you spend a minute just talking just a little bit about refreshing everybody on Channelnomics, what you guys do, where you do it, and then we'll kind of get into some more meaty topics.
Oh, sure. No, so Channelnomics, we just celebrated 14 years in business. We work with technology vendors, distributors, partners around the world in developing go-to-market strategies, helping to provide insights into market trends, and fostering better relationships that lead to higher producing channels. One of the things that we like to say is that we help build confidence so channels can be bolder. And we have a lot of fun doing it. It's great to work with companies, with vendors, with the distributors we work with GTDC and the other associations we work with to make with this thing we call the channel and partnerships better for everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's really significant because one of the things that you guys obviously do, which is really important, I think, in the channel world, is you're dealing with all members of the ecosystem. Right? It's not just the vendor community. It's not just the distributor community. It's not just the solution providers, but it's all of them and obviously more, right? When you add MSPs and MSSPs and ISPs, et cetera. And I think that's a big deal and it's important because as you start to think about how this all comes together, I think you really have to look at it as an ecosystem play. And clearly, one of the things that's near and dear to my heart, one of the reasons that you and I talk a lot is the work you do with distribution, right? And so you and I spent a lot of time over the last 6 months talking about and looking at various trends and directions. But from your standpoint now, how do you feel like the value prop for vendors relative to distribution is kind of playing out? What's important, and what are you seeing in the marketplace?
Well, I think that the important thing to first start off with is that anyone who starts off the conversation that distribution is dead, is probably not paying attention to what the imperatives are in the market. Yeah. I mean, Frank, you and I've you and I've known each other for so long. And every few years, we'll hear somebody come along and say the death of distribution is imminent. The research that we've done with GTDC shows that the vendor community is squarely on the side of increasing value, not decreasing. So we've asked the question, the plurality of the vendors we've surveyed have said that distribution's value is expected to increase. The vendors are looking at distribution differently. It depends on which market you're in. So the more mature markets have a different dynamic with distribution versus more emerging markets or even the developing markets. One of the sayings that they have in Europe when it comes to distribution is that the further east you go, the more you need distribution. Yep. And That is absolutely, and I would actually add to that, the further south you go, you need distribution.
Yeah.
And that's where those developing markets are. I think what the vendor community is looking for is they're looking for better means of driving sell-through, distribution, leaning on distribution to apply their resources to help drive the results that they're looking for, and increasingly looking for the more advanced capabilities for enabling things like digital sales, like services, like more professional support. And this is still core to the distribution's value proposition, which is to augment vendor capabilities.
Yeah.
And this is where, you and I've talked about this, is that, are distributors service providers, or are they partners to the vendors? And the reality is that they're both.
Yeah.
And the distributors are returning that in kind. They're making tremendous investments in their capabilities to meet the evolving dynamics of the market.
Yeah, and that's the piece that I think is probably not understood as well, because when you look at the core function of distribution from day one, it was viewed as a bank and a warehouse, right? And it was in the beginning. I mean, they were able to, provide financing to a lot of folks that needed it and still do. They were able to provide the ability to get product from point A to point B, and whether point A to point B was domestic or global, they had the capability of doing that, and they still do. And then the capabilities kept increasing based on vendor needs and vendor requirements, right? Help me find a partner network, help me build a partner network, help me figure out, who I ought to get to, help me provide a service to those players, et cetera. What I think is misunderstood, and goes back to this intermediation point that you brought up earlier, is while all that's been happening, major investments have also been happening behind the scenes to keep up with, in our case now, the digital sort of evolution that just continues, right? What do you see there? And in other words, I know your studies indicate the core functions are still extraordinarily important. What are you seeing and hearing and feeling relative to the next level of capabilities? The platforms, the marketplaces, et cetera. What's your take there, and how's that going to play out? As you look out the next couple of years.
I think it's tremendously important, but I also think that we can't lose sight of the core value propositions that get overlooked first. So, you said it, is that distribution has often been seen, as that, what is the old saying, pick, pack, and ship.
Yeah.
Right. And then they'd be the financing arm. So they facilitate faster recognition for the vendors. They make it easier for the partners to purchase. I mean, all that remains true. But there's a lot of things that distribution does today, and let's just say yesterday, that gets undervalued. The logistics, the inventory management, when it comes to software, the license activation and management. These are all things that distribution has done for a long time, and they are burdensome to the vendors if they had to do them on their own.
Yeah.
Now you start looking forward. And a lot of distributors, more than 80% of the distributors worldwide, have some level of digital sales capability. And you say, well, why do the distributors need that? Well, it's because the dynamics of purchasing are changing. The partners need more access, and they need access when they want it. And so having these digital sales platforms really does help facilitate that. But the thing that distribution has always had underneath it was this mountain of data. And so the distributors know a lot about the partners. They know a lot about the customers that they're selling into. And the distributors are now applying that systemically to identify new opportunities. And so you combine these digital platforms that are not just sales platforms, they're management platforms.
Yeah.
That their partners are able to use, their vendors are able to use. That's going to create greater synergies in terms of the data to the analytics to be able to facilitate more efficient sell-through. And that, I think, is the really exciting thing for distributors. And then you level that out with, again, the thing that they've always had. They have these vast networks of partners. I'll share a story. I can't say who. A company we were working with, they desperately wanted to get out of distribution, but they also wanted to expand. in markets that they felt that they were underpenetrated in. And I kept saying to them, I go, where are you going to find these partners? Where do you think you're going to get them if you pull out of distribution? I said, oh, we'll go out and find them. I said, you already have them. Just go talk to your distributors. And that's exactly what happened. And they were able to grow their partner network. Yeah, that's what I mean, is that I think one of the challenges we have in the industry is that the first presumption is to presume that distribution can't. And the reality is that distribution can, if you go and you work with them, if you ask them, if you understand what their true capabilities are. And I think that that's something, it's getting out there, but I think we need to do more amplification of it.
Yeah, I do. In fact, one of the things that I said at the last event that we had a panel with, the distribution executives in North America. We also do it in Europe, and we will shortly be doing it in Asia. And you and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But is the last thing that a distribution executive wants to hear. The worst thing that you could say to them is, "I didn't know you did that." And there's a lot of that happening right now because of the investments that are being made and of the expanding capabilities. If the solution providers and even the vendors aren't consistently talking and in touch with the distributors, they may not recognize that they've created a set of services that they didn't have before, right? I see the platforms as providing three primary things. You mentioned them, but number one is there's a ton of operational efficiency and the ability to just process work that's being done through them, right? Whether it's activating software, whether it's billing, whether it's account management, et cetera. That's happening. There's no debate that that's happening. Second is the marketplace. Everybody has a marketplace these days, so you got to have a marketplace. Vendors have a marketplace. Hyperscalers have a marketplace. Distributors have to have a marketplace, and they have one, and they have the ability to tie into that marketplace a ton of third-party, solutions, products to create a solution, which is a big deal. But the third and the most important you mentioned is the data. And that's the piece that I think will be the game changer. Fact of the matter is distributors have had data for a long time, but they've never really been able to effectively deploy it in a way that makes sense, in a way that drives value. Do you see that happening? And what do you think needs to be done to get that to be, really game changing?
You're right. Most of the major distributors that we've worked with have had these analytic services, or they've been able to expose data and strategic direction. Let's call it that. Like, oh, did you know this? And the data is revealing this information.
Yep.
Mostly white space gaps, right? I think it's misaligned expectations, and I think and it's not just the vendor community or the distributor community or the partner community. There's this pervasiveness that the data should provide an answer. Data provides a direction.
Yep.
And until you find a receptive audience that knows what to do with it, the data doesn't really have value. And part of the challenge is that you can expose all this data that you want to distributors up to the vendors, and you can get the vendors excited, and because they can say, okay, we can do these things. On the partner side, though, let's just set aside the tier one resellers and integrators.
Yeah.
Because they're pretty sophisticated organizations. We don't worry about them. It's the tier two and tier three partners that the vendors always look to milk more. Milk's probably the wrong word, but to drive more business through.
Yeah.
These are companies that don't necessarily have the ability to consume analytics. They don't have real sales methodologies and real sales plans. I mean, the further down you go into the channel, the less sophisticated the organizations become. And so the real trick, I think, is going to be to make that information easily consumable and actionable. And once we get to that, and that's one of the things that these digital platforms, these management platforms we're just talking about, are really doing, is that it's not just providing them with a, here, did you know this? It's providing them with a system by which they can take action on. And I think that that's a part of the game changer for distribution.
I think you're spot on. I mean, I can tell you, and I just had this conversation 2 days ago with somebody regarding the data, using my experience coming out of a pretty good sized solution provider, over $100 million player. We were not very sophisticated, and you had to really search to figure out who the catcher was to catch the data within our company, and then figure out how to go utilize it, right? In other words, who within that company is going to drive the sales rep that has responsibility for the account that we now know hasn't refreshed their, desktops for 4 years. Who's going to drive that and make sure that that happens? And unless there's a process for doing it, the data becomes useless. And I think the distributors are in the process of figuring that out, right? And figuring out how to get that information disseminated and get it acted on.
Right. Well, I'll add one complicating factor to that. And the original sin of every business is comp plans. So compensation drives behavior.
Yep.
The thing that, and like I deal with this with vendors that say, oh, why aren't our partners doing more? And I'm like, well, do you actually think that they get up in the morning thinking about you? Do they think that you're the only thing that's on their minds?
Right.
There's a reason why we named my company Channelnomics, is because this is about economics. It's not about technology.
Yeah.
And so in order to get action, you have to create the economic conditions in order for partners to feel comfortable or confident enough to act. So distributors really are a source that they can build confidence up on both the vendor side and the partner side. Partners are extraordinarily risk averse. So you have to show them that it's not just that there's a white space here, or an opportunity, but that opportunity is worth chasing after.
Yep.
And so and then it becomes incumbent upon the vendors to work with the distributors to help make that economic advantage clear, or that economic opportunity clear. And so I think that there's a lot, we just can't look at it and say, we're going to lean on the data, we're going to lean on the system. We also have to lean into the economics of this and create those conditions of where things look advantageous.
Yeah, I agree. But when it gets to the point where both the vendors and certainly the partners acknowledge that, yep, a distributor not only did all the things that they do, but provided me insights into some data that led to me being able to drive, incremental sales, to your point, the economics of it, right? That becomes game changing. That then becomes game changing. And that becomes what the distributors are looking toward, is stickiness, right? Because once I get you on my platform and you understand the value of what I can provide, then I'm stuck. I'm gonna keep working that. And that's exactly what the strategy is. And frankly, it's working, and it's evolving, and it still needs work. But you and I both see it, out there in the marketplace when we talk to people and hear what's happening. Yeah. Changing gears a little bit, Larry, one of the things that has been very helpful to us is that your expertise is not just limited for North America, right? Which, a lot of folks we talk to have a North America view. And obviously this is a global environment, and one that will become more global over time, obviously, more significantly. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing globally and some of the nuances kind of that you see from a go-to-market standpoint. Is there anything that kind of jumps out?
Well, let's start by saying that our point of view, the Channelnomics point of view, is you start everything globally and you work your way down to the regions. And we often look to try to create global consistency, because if you have global consistency, then you have a common framework for making things more manageable. Obviously, different regions have different unique characteristics and different needs, different regulatory climates, different cultures. So you have to take those into consideration. I think, like, I don't want to say one region is better than the other, particularly in regards to distribution, but the North American market is very mature, and it's not a place where there's a lot of mystery in distribution.
Yeah.
It's also a place that is accelerating this, the adoption of these new capabilities, because it also has, one of the, US, Canada particularly have best, some of the best infrastructure for facilitating next generation services. When you look at places like Europe and EMEA, so, in Europe, hugely fragmented market region because of all the diversity. It's not, even with the European Union, you still have a diversity of cultures and local jurisdictions that you have to navigate. The Middle East is all about policy compliance, right? So it's a regulatory climate that drives activity. Africa is about risk mitigation. So distribution is playing a huge role in that. And that's where, you're starting to see the distributors as they're looking at the changing dynamics and what they need to do for their viability. You're seeing some consolidation starting to happen more in Europe. You'll probably see that spread across the entire EMEA region. Ultimately, you'll probably see that happen in Asia too, further down the line. Asia is if we think Europe and EMEA is complicated, Asia is hugely more complicated because of its size and also the variations in the size of countries and their economic conditions or their economic state. I mean, this is why we have one of the big reasons why we have distribution in these other parts of the world, because they're the local experts. They're the boots on the ground. And one of the things, again, I'll tell a story about a vendor we worked with. They were trying to grow their existing markets, particularly this was in Europe, but Europe, it wasn't just Europe, it was EMEA. So we came in and we actually created a realignment strategy to where we gave the more mature countries different marching orders through distribution to work with. We pushed most of the business in the emerging markets, Eastern Europe, most of the Middle East around Israel, Syria, not Syria anymore, but Iraq, and Jordan, and down into Africa, because we could, by leveraging distribution in those smaller markets, we were able to divert internal resources to markets to where they could have greater impact. And this is where I think that the vendors need to reorient their thinking. It's not that they have to have coverage everywhere. They have to have distribution coverage where it will be most effective, and their own coverage where they think they can have a greater impact.
Yeah.
So I think that we're starting to see more of that.
Yeah, it's always been, it's funny, over the years, having looked at the shifting, sort of landscape relative to go to market, it's always been roughly 2/3 of the business goes through the channel, a third, goes through some form of direct now, either a marketplace or large company direct. But what we've seen is traditionally it's always been higher in Europe and Asia for the exact reasons that you mentioned. It's more like, 75-80%, right? And it makes sense, and it will continue. One of the things that we're doing, Larry, and I know you're aware of this, but I want to talk to you a little bit about it, is GTDC, although, we call ourselves a global entity, really wasn't a global entity because we hadn't been and we're not in Asia. And, when I got here in 2019, we're thinking about it. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that didn't make sense really until last year when we sort of, started the process again. So we have expanded. We have hired a managing director in APJ. You're very, very well aware of that. We've got our first summit coming up in November, and I know you'll be there with us, and you'll present to the leadership team, as well as the audience, of which we'll have at least 20 to 30 vendors, 50 to 100 people. So it won't be huge relative to what we do, but it'll be the beginning of sort of our process in there. you and I recently looked at a lot of data from in Europe relative to what you've seen and some surveys you've done. So give us a little bit of a preview of what you'll talk about when we're in Asia in November to that audience.
We actually have research and development specifically for this event in Singapore. We are going to be talking with partners across all the regions serviced by GTDC, asking them about what the distributors do on behalf of the vendors that add value to their businesses. And we're starting with this as typically with all bits of research, we start with a problem statement. And in this case, our problem statement is that the vendors don't always recognize what the distributors are doing on their behalf.
Yeah.
And I think that this is critically important in a region like Asia. Asia is vast. So we say, Asia Pacific or, Asia, Japan, Asia Pacific, Japan, whichever variation you go with. It is such a huge region. Australia, New Zealand looks more like North America in Europe. China is an entity all on its own. So is South Korea and Japan. Japan is virtually an entity onto its own. Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand are vibrant markets, but they're still relatively small, but they're growing. You have these massive markets that are merging, Malaysia and Indonesia. And then, of course, you have India on the other side. These are all vastly different. And you simply just cannot go to market in Asia Pacific without going through distribution. But helping the vendors understand what they're actually getting out of their investments and how those investments actually translates into the partner experience, that's what we're coming to the table with. And so we'll be rolling out the first bit of that research for Asia at the event in Singapore, and then we'll be doing subsequent installments for North America and Europe next year.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. And the other thing that kind of in closing that we should also comment on is one of the things that you did for us recently at the event in North America that we had last February, and also in Europe, is you helped run what we are now calling a finance forum for us, where we brought in CFOs from the vendor community and the distributor community and kind of got in a room and talked about, some common issues is probably the wrong word, but common considerations, things that are happening in the marketplace. And we've never done that before, but we're able to do it a lot with the data and the information that you provided, because we're able to get a viewpoint, not just on feelings, but on facts, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to continue that kind of thing. But I know as you're speaking to the vendors, that becomes more and more important, particularly those that are worried about, their overall go-to-market costs and how do I manage that and what do I do, and et cetera. Comment on that just a bit, just so that, we get a sense for what work, we've done there.
Yeah. So I know that some people don't like it when I call it this, is that a lot of vendors look at distributors or the payments or the cost of distribution as the distribution tax.
Right.
I think that's an unfair characterization, and we've done this work with GTDC, we've published reports on this to say that the replacement cost of the functions that distribution provides outweighs the expense that the vendors are paying into it. You can say that, but it's not always immediately believable. It doesn't ring true. When you look at your average distributor, they're working on margins. Their effective gross margins are somewhere between 1.5% and 3%.
Right.
There isn't a vendor out there that could accept 1.5% to 3%. Right. So this distribution is highly efficient, but helping the vendors understand the value that comes from distribution. What are they actually getting out of it? What could they be getting out of it? That was the point of the workshops we did earlier this year. Mm-hmm. It's the point of a new series that we're launching with GTDC in October, a series of workshops we're doing in Europe, to where we're going to be working with vendor representatives to brainstorm and illuminate these different functions and value propositions to bring them more to the fore and develop new best practices. And there'll be more information available on that soon. But there's, I think that that's the thing that we always have to remind everyone that distribution's value isn't always apparent until it's lost. And that's right.
Yeah,
So
totally.
you don't know what you're missing until it's gone. And
Yeah.
the thing is that we don't want them to go through that pain. So that's why we're bringing it out in front.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's good in terms of thinking about it and positioning it that way, because the way to think about it is if you didn't have it, what would you do? And,
Right.
there's a lot of folks that don't get that. From personal experience, I can tell you, having worked with 3 vendors, all of whom at one point thought they could do it better, direct versus, working with distributors, didn't work for a variety of different reasons, which is why the hybrid go-to-market model is clearly the right answer, with distribution being a major part of that, right? Because of the orchestration piece that they do. And nobody else can do that, right? Nobody else has the relationships upstream and downstream that they have and can leverage. So, for you and I, it seems to become pretty apparent, pretty
Well,
obvious. But the
look,
fact of the matter is, it's an informed opinion based on 40 years of experience on my end, maybe a little less on your end, but you now talk to more folks in the market than I do. And that, I think, is what matters, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, like the real light bulb goes off when you go out and you have these conversations. Is that obviously if you're moving tangible product, hardware, um, working through distribution is an imperative. You can't do it otherwise. Software, you get more questions, but still distribution has a lot of value with software. The real light bulb goes off when you go out and you talk to the hyperscalers, and the hyperscalers are working through distribution because the distributors can perform certain functions that they can't perform well at scale. It's as simple as that.
Yep.
And so once you start recognizing is that there's just things that distribution can do better than you can on your own. Now, it's not always true. It's not universally true. It's not universal. It's not true in all circumstances, but you should go through that process, and look, do you build, buy, or partner? And oftentimes the issue here is that you can partner with distribution to perform the things that either you don't want to do or you can't do. And that's the advice I give everyone, is that think about what you're going to lose or what you could gain if you had this extra limb to work with.
I couldn't say it better than that. That is, and that I think would be an excellent way to close the discussion. Larry, I really appreciate, one, all the work you do with us, two, the expertise that you and your team have in the marketplace, is really significant. And I appreciate, your time, and we'll continue to work together. So thank you.
The same goes back to you and GTDC. It's great to partner with you and your organization, and the work that we put out. It's, my team and I find it really rewarding, but more so because of when we go out and we talk with the companies that you work with, your members and the vendors that work with you, is that it really does have a real satisfying benefit of being able to help them advance their thinking and their operations.
Totally. All right. Well, thanks, Larry. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Frank.